Ready to go? Okay. So, we've had, as we've gone along here, you've been working off some of the stuff from New South Wales, extensively, their documents and what have you. And we've reorganized that. And the reorganization is a document that starts out with the fire dynamics. So that document is being worked on right now, and it's in very good development. A lot of background work, happened last October and January. Vince Conrad, Peter Eller, Bruce Lake, a number of people came to Ottawa. Cheryl was part of it. She was with us for a while. And so we really just looking at ensuring that our what we're teaching in fire dynamics has a basis in science. So referencing those materials in a way that it was meaningful. And so we're in the process of writing that base document for you, along with the assessments and learning outcomes associated with that. And so if you think of it as a model, we're going to go, there's this fire dynamics document. That's not a great marker. And then from that fire dynamics, we've got this thing called the VP is equal to B plus safe. And as you know, Shan probably went over that with you the other day, the smoke, air, heat, flame concept, and the subsequent B&E, and then introducing the concept of the ventilation profile. You've heard a lot about that, and it's referenced. So essentially what the ventilation profile, and it's really a simple concept, and when we were doing wind-driven fires in Chicago and in New York, identified some really unusual patterns in what we were seeing outside. And I realized as a safety officer at the time, this is how I was actually evaluating the fire, telling me, what's going on in the fire. I was kind of going backwards. So if we think about how firefighters evaluate fire, it's very much so and critical to our understanding as we're looking at this building, and then we're looking at either flame or smoke issuing, and that visual representation is how we extract or extrapolate all that information that's going on inside, hopefully, right? So we tried to look at that, and there's been a couple of iterations of this mnemonic, if you will. And so VP being the ventilation profile, building environmental factors, plus the smoke, air, heat, flame tracks, if you will, to evaluate fire. And it's very, very simple concept, and hopefully you guys can see that in the back. I don't know, the angle's not that great, but if you look at fire, and we look at a very simple model, it goes like this, and as the fire grows, it changes to something like this. And then as it gets closer to that flashover, it changes and looks like this, quite full. So conceptually, if we look at it, and we know the pressures are very, very small, and they're driven by the convection and the buoyancy. If we said the pressure is increasing slightly, and that pressure, and we have air moving in at a velocity due to gravity. It's called the gravity current. And I think, Shan, you would have done something on the gravity current the other day? A little bit. So just the denser air, it's heavier, it's going to fall, and it's going to go in. And that's what you get, that bidirectional flow. Okay? And then as the fire gets bigger, conceptually, pressure gets bigger, and this velocity picks up. We've started to block the opening, restrict it, and so that air picks up, and what we start to see in the smoke is more turbulence because the velocity of the air, we're now mixing at that boundary, okay, between the smoke and the air track. Right? Then if we said again, that pressure is getting bigger, the fire is getting hotter, it's pushing more. Okay, this velocity starts to go up, and this has been measured at 25 kilometers per hour an hour. Okay, so very, very fast, and so what you get is a lot of mixing. So high velocity air, extreme turbulence. Everyone gets that. That's a fairly simple model. And if you think about how this box, what this box looks like, that flow is across the whole top of the opening. Okay. Well, there are a number of other profiles, ventilation profiles, and these are the ones we described at wind-driven fires, I saw flame and smoke issuing off the bottom of the sill. And I went, that's not normal. It's an abnormal profile. And saw some other ones that were really quite, and it's very straight or smooth flow. And as you move to the turbulent flow, the shape changes. It goes to a wedge. And here it goes right down to almost like a cone. Okay? So that concept of what it looks like tells you could map any one of these against a histogram, which is, temperature up here and time here. And so if we use that standard model, we know it's not accurate of all fire. And we said this was flashover and this is backdraft as a concept, right? Is that you could pick that point and pick it up here. This point you could pick up here. And as we got to this point, we know we're getting in this zone where it's going to light up. So we don't have the benefit of an instrument to tell us we're reaching flammable range. And flammable range pertains to a single commodity. And smoke encompasses all three states of matter: liquids, solids, and gases, right? We know that gases burn, but all that matrix is there. And what ratio it's in can be highly dependent on how efficient the combustion process is. So this is our instrument, our visual cue, right? That ventilation profile tells you where you are in the burning regime, tells you something about the flow path, right? And where this fire is abnormal, okay? If you can show dynamic flow paths, and that's what these are, dynamic. The term flow path was introduced into the lexicon just recently through UL studies, and they talk about a bidirectional flow or a unidirectional flow out through this opening. And we're adding to that the dynamic flow path because they can alternate between an outlet and an inlet. And those dynamic flow paths tell you something right away. It's extreme or unstable fire conditions. And so again, before you make entry, you really have to have that understanding, and then that's where we can apply the controls. Okay? So there are many different profiles. There are some that, if you looked at this dead on, you might have a hollow and flame all along here, but there's no flame coming out or no smoke coming out. That's a total inlet. This can alternate, and then the flame shoots out this way, and it looks like a star fire. Or a starfish. We call it starfire. Again, if I looked at the face of that window and I put a quadrant in there, just for reference, how many of you have seen smoke issuing from a corner of a window? Hands up. You've seen smoke come off the side like that. It's not coming off the whole thing, it's just coming off one side. That means this area in here is being impacted by wind. It's got a bidirectional flow that's accelerating the fire through wind. It's not a regular unimpacted fire. So right away, wind is a factor, right? And if we go back to here, building factors, there's an extensive array of building factors as well as the environmental factors. So you're assessing the building construction, the type, the compartments, finishes, as Shan may have talked about the other day, passive systems, the openings in the system. And we've characterized all of those for you, and they all tie back to the curriculum on fire dynamics, factors that change fire growth. The same is true of the environmental factors. We know that wind has an impact. We know that the shape of the land has an impact. So we're talking weather. So a day like today with gusting winds can lead to tremendous fire growth if it's directed at the fire or an opening at that fire. Impact your ventilation operations. Impact the way you approach the fire. We know that in a wind-driven fire, we want to come from, if you will, that outlet side and introduce that water, right? Or if we can, through an inlet. Either way, you don't come at that fire within the flow path. You stay out of the flow path, okay? Very, very critical information. And you use smoke air track to tell you where you are in the burning regime, right? It tells you what kind of flow path you've got. You can see some of the heat condition as well as the flame. And as sort of step back from that, as officers in the room potentially, or people acting as officers, or firefighters being able to communicate, I'm going to say that's a dresser. There's the same dresser, and there's that dresser. And someone's in here, and the officer taps them on the shoulder and says, let's get out of here, okay? And you go, hey, well, why'd you pull us out? We were just getting it. And the deal becomes the officer's aware of these smoke, air, heat, flame conditions, saying, what was I seeing on the top of that dresser? 20 kilowatts per meter per second, right? The pyrolysis was taking place. Oh, I started to notice in the smoke air tract, I started to see ghosting, or I saw a bit of flame at the outlet. When I look back, I started to see some auto ignition. These gases are too rich to burn, but if they get enough air, or you raise the temperature enough, they're going to rain destruction down, as Jeff said, 16 times that energy coming at you. It just builds very quickly, that radiative information or temperature. And so here, again, very simple way to explain to the company officer, or the company officer can explain to the firefighter what actions they took and why. And they may not want to invest in 2 weeks of fire dynamics, but at least have a knowledge and understanding of their existing information, that legacy knowledge about fire, and they have extensive legacy knowledge. They can at least give it into a system that they can communicate to you, or vice versa. The new firefighter can ask questions against it. So we see this as a very valuable decision support tool. We go back to these various changes in that profile. You can tell a lot about what the fire is doing, what conditions are impacting the fire, and whether or not you, having applied water or controlled air, are making an impact on that ventilation profile in a positive manner. A 2.5 or 65 mil shooting in the window and heavy black smoke blowing out, and it goes white, what's happening? I'm having impact. And then, seconds later, but it all comes back, come black, it's a shielded fire, or you're not getting the water in the right place. So again, it gives you an assessment tool. So that's what it is. It's real-time assessment. And once you build this knowledge from the props, from the large-scale props, and you get a handle on being able to control it, you can now teach it and implement it on a regular basis. Okay, so that's what's critical about this approach. And if you understand these basic forms, right? Once you see these basic forms, realize they can happen anywhere in the quadrant. The projection could come from here. The projection could come, inverted off the bottom corner, as opposed to, inverted across the whole bottom. So it's a wide spectrum. But once you see the basic patterns, you'll never forget them, and you won't step into the problem. And that's really what we're trying to do, is get you to be aware of what's going on in the fire and take the appropriate control. And that's where I want to take you next, is very simply, if I said to you, we went fire dynamics, we went this decision support tool that mirrors that fire dynamics understanding. And then we're down here, and I'm not great with the board work here, but essentially is the tactical bricks, if you will, tactical understanding of the controls, right, and what those controls are. And so we've worked on those for a while, and I'll bring them up here. And I think you'll see that they're something you already know. So what we did was, let's see if I'll go up. I'll just show you this first. So each of the different tactics that you would normally understand and know has within the body of the speaker notes is an actual reference back to the curriculum. So we have an extensive curriculum that we went back and looked at, okay, what does this exposure control do? And you'll see in a minute. And the learning outcome links. So we have a number of learning outcomes and the links back to that learning. We'll talk about flames, fire plume, flame spread, propagation, flashover, and modes of heat transfer. So very simply, what we've done, let's see if this gets up there. So we said, let's start outside the building with water, okay? And exposure control. And some of the graphics may not exactly match, right? So we know we're changing them, so don't get hung up on the graphics. We know we have to change some of them. But essentially, each one of the tactics is laid out. What's the objective? How does this thing work? And what's the preferred technique? And in some cases, we have notes to ourselves, right? You know, it was quite controversial for a while. People were using water curtain, right, instead of actual direct application. And the radiation goes right through the water curtain and could light up the building. And so that was a bit of a controversy maybe 5, 10 years ago. People were misapplying and misunderstanding the fire dynamics associated with just trying to put a fog stream up as an exposure control, and radiation passed right through it, set fire to the other place, okay? So you have to put water to pull the heat off because the radiation passes through, okay, through the gaps. So then what we did is we said, and we tried to keep them concise, is what are the tactical considerations? And so we put in the things we thought were most critical for the tactical application. So again, these are all tactics you already know. We haven't changed, we just added and organized it in a way that gives you a way, if you say, and I'll show you as we go through, how you can pick and choose them to apply it against the problem you encounter after you've done your decision, right? After you've said, hey, this is the kind of fire I had, I need these bricks, right, to throw at it. And it's a way to teach it. But they're not and shouldn't be seen, because some people say, well, you do this with this. We recognize that, but we're just, if you will, chunking the information in a way that makes sense against the curriculum. So exterior attack, if you will, the transitional heat release rate, soften the target hard from the arc. What's the objective? Again, why are you doing this? How does it work? Okay? And essentially, we identify how it works. And don't worry, you're all going to be in another class where we're going to go through everything, okay? So I'm going through it quickly for you, just so we get you an understanding, build some confidence. What's the preferred technique? Right? And you'll see straight or smooth bore, right? Taking care not to disrupt the flow path. That's the critical information. And alternative technique, some of our Swedish friends showed us video, and they took a 25-pound dry chem, and you know, they're a rural situation, they're waiting for the water, went up to the window, and you know, shot it in the window, fire goes out, bought them some time, got the line into position, finished the job. And so there's alternative techniques when you don't, you know, it might be that simple, okay? So we've tried to put alternative techniques wherever we could. So what are the considerations for this? Well, you can see you want to coordinate interior prior to interior. You want to do it from an exterior position, through a ventilation open, and you shouldn't disrupt the flow path. And that flow rate is appropriate with the heat release rate. So it's not, well, you do it for 2 seconds, you do it for 3 seconds. You do it for however long it takes to knock that thing down, to buy that time. Could be a function of the volume that you're in, delayed entry. You know, again, typical, even in the urban environment, you might be waiting for your backup. They're on a MBC, right? A car crash or some other call, and you could be waiting for that next due rig 5 minutes, and you don't have the horsepower to get to the problem. You may have a water problem. Well, you can do a lot, but you got to recognize that, hey, I knocked it down, but I haven't got the backup yet. I'm going to knock it down again before I make that effort. Okay? So that's the kind of decisions we want to see. And then gas cooling. What is the objective? Right? And how does it work? And again, you'll see all the learning outcome links associated with that. And this slideshow hasn't been changed, but you know, what's the preferred technique? Water, mist, or fog? And when done correctly, you're not disrupting that thermal layer. Okay? And again, looking at what's the preferred technique. And this is a you know, John McDonough feels that it is a suppression technique, and then there are others that feel it's not. And so this is you agree that it's not suppression technique. Okay, so I heard different the other day, so it's okay. There are people who believe it is not, and others that believe it is. So we're going to refine that and really get the best evidence as an approach. But generally we feel that it's essentially a great way to progress to get to the fire, because you got to dial it up to knock it down with a straight stream. So essentially looking at that, and we distinguish between the concept of gas cooling and flame cooling. Because if you got flame, kill it. Right? It's a source of your problem. And then indirect attack, again, you know, what's its objective? How does it work? And what's the preferred technique? And what are the alternative tactics? Well, you know, we have the piercing applicator, the cellar, and the floor below nozzle. You can see we need a better graphic. And again, you'll see some of the, what it's used for, if you will, or tactical considerations, and how, and what you should consider with respect to that. So in terms of an objective for the direct attack, again, what's the objective? Fire suppression, right? This is how it works. Preferred technique. And then the direct attack, again, the tactical considerations associated with that tactic. So again, each time as a way to teach the student as well as to help them remember, what is it, why am I doing this? How does this work? What do I have to consider? Right? And we're not going to say this is, you know, finished, because when you get it, right, you may say, well, what about this? Well, you know what? We'll add it. We're not perfect. We may have missed some concepts. You may have some better ideas. And that's part of what you're going to be doing next time around. So everything we could do with water that we could think of, and now we look at everything we could do with air. And so one of them is don't give it air. Right? And so limit the combustion air to the fire. How does it work? Flow path management. And then preferred technique, close or restrict the openings. Alternative ventilation control devices. And we have here, you know, one of our sponsors gave us the curtains, basically door curtains, and they've been proven quite effective as an approach to closing off and not letting so much air in. And it's a little shy of the door, like that, so your hose goes through, and if you need to jump out, it's not blocking your way. You can get through it quickly, right? So it just stops all that air moving through, right? Buys you that time. And then when you've decided to do that, if you've decided there's nobody alive in there, or they're not savable, right? You're beyond their capacity to live or recover from exposure. You know that interface layer is going to lower, right? Heat release rate is going to go down. Visibility is going to become poor. Hey, make sure you got a thermal imager, because you need to watch what's going to happen. Or is there anything happening because I lose a window somewhere else? And you have to remember, when we say plan for exposure control, after you close it off, you better do something. You're going to have to do some cooling, right? Whether that's gas cooling or one of the other water applications, because as soon as you open it up, it's going to come back, right? We've learned that from fire dynamics. So we looked at horizontal in the same way, looked at the objectives, and you know, we're rewriting this in the text right now, and it will be properly reflected in the considerations, is because we do know from the UL studies and other aspects of, you know, research done both by NIST and here at the National Research Council that, you know, giving air makes a problem. So it may be appropriate, it may be inappropriate, and one brick may come before the other. Right. And so again, horizontal tactical ventilation, same sort of concept, and those considerations, you know, you see, gas cooling prior to direct attack may be advisable because you've got a fair bit of smoke in there. You may have, again, we don't advocate putting you on the roof. Being a roof shepherd, you don't stand over the vent, right, on the roof. But what are the objectives? How does it work? And what's the preferred technique? Okay. So this has been done, and I won't beat this up, but, you know, the vertical. Then we looked at PPA. So mechanical or forced, and you know, we see purposeful direction of the flow path is the concept, and essentially how does it work? Create unidirectional flow path, outlet established prior to the mechanical ventilation inlet, followed up by timely direct fire attack. And it's critical the size of the inlet and the outlet are balanced, you know, in terms of size, bigger size versus a smaller inlet. And so depending on the condition that you're trying to achieve. But if you look at this, again, we know from recent research that in large volumes, PPA does not work. It's actually detrimental because you're just mixing air into that fuel, the fire gas and smoke. So what you have to do is you got to really, PPA is really suited to restricted or, if you will, smaller compartments. Doesn't work on large volumes. Like a volume like this would be a bad thing to do. Okay. So PPA, what those attack considerations are, and then we went to positive pressure ventilation, and we're saying this: you're not attacking the fire, you've done something to the fire already, and now you're going to do something with the smoke that's resulted from the fire. Okay. And so how does it work? And I think many of us would be more comfortable with this and more experienced with this in that post-fire or somewhat of a control situation. And so some of the tactical considerations. And then we looked at PPI, right? So isolation, you know, multi-door row, we're going to pressurize this place and that place so we don't have that pressure of the fire gases, a convective activity, pushing combustible gas into those other areas, transferring heat, or, you know, if you will, embers, whatever it is that's going to get pushed in to start those other areas. So that's just, you know, the other one. And again, the tactical considerations. So the whole concept is that you study fire dynamics and understand it. We have a decision support tool which is tied to the fire dynamics. We have tactics that you can define as it relates back to fire dynamics and fit the problem and the right choice. Give you an example. Two-story, residential. Okay? Heavy fire showing on the second floor. You show up with 4 people. Right? Do you go in the front door or do you do hard from the yard? Who would go in for the hard for the yard? You know, now that we know, we say, you know what? It doesn't have a detrimental effect. It improves conditions and buys you time. It makes tenability for everybody in that building much better. Okay, so are we going for hard for the yard? Hands up. Hard for the yard. Okay. So we're going for hard for the yard. Okay, what are you going to do next? You might force the door and go upstairs. What are you going to do then? Maybe direct? Might be one. Okay, let's just say we went direct to put the fire out. Okay, we took care of the problem. You use 2 tactical bricks. You use that hard from the yard and direct, and then you use a direct attack. Oh, I got to watch that guy Brad. Brad says, no, you know what I want to do? He said, I'm going to do that hard from the yard, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to gas cool my way up into that smoke in case it ignites again, and then I'm going to go direct. 3 tactical bricks. Conversely, you know, Sean says, nope, I'm going hard from the yard. I'm going to use PPV, right? Push that smoke so I can see, and then I'm going to do a direct attack. All valid, depending on the fire condition, but you can see how you can mix the bricks, right? So one of the things that's going on from there, sort of coming down to the tactical, is the decisions and how decisions are made and decision support. So Catherine Lamb, who's here, that's her thing. You know, she's really good at that, explaining how decisions are made. And so she's given us a bit of a model, and so she's building, if you will, a system by which you can challenge yourself or you can challenge your students. Here's a stock set of questions against what the problem is, whether that's a picture you see, whether that's a video, to build that muscle memory so that when you arrive on scene, you're picking the right things. You're doing the right things, and you know why you're doing it. Or as an instructor, you can say to the student, why did you do that? And then you might go, well, you know, I use the direct attack because I know that it improves tenability. The preferred technique is this, and these are the outcomes that will occur. And tactically, I only have 4 people. Big marks, right? So you see what I'm saying? We're trying to really link that knowledge of fire and to the practice. And, you know, I don't know if they explained the Latin on the bottom of that coat, but it's seek knowledge in fire. Okay, that's what that is. And that's really what we're trying to do, is build fire literacy in the group so that you pass on fire literacy. And that fire literacy doesn't just include, if you will, knowledge of the fire, but the consequences of fire. And so why are we doing, you know, industrial hygiene? We know that the byproducts of the fire are toxic. We know in other studies that, you know, it's absorbed by the skin. We believe that this is the mechanism by which much of our exposures occur. So again, we want to control for that. Poison is the dose. If you reduce the dose, get it off your skin, you reduce the level of poison that's being absorbed by the body. And then you see all the practices of, you know, putting on, if you will, the N95s. Get rid of that particle, right? Because the particle atomically, ionically, methyl ethyl bad stuff bonds to it. And you absorb it, you ingest it, you inhale it, and it gets distributed in your body. So again, we want to stop those processes. And that's why we want you to, out on the floor, is to make sure and advocate for this, is that you don't get in the truck dirty. Because all you do is, you know, Brad's got small kids. Sorry, Brad, I'm using you as an example. But he shows up the next day, the truck stinks, he sits down, got to go get groceries, or they got to go on another call, whatever that thing is. Well, what happens next? He gets in his car, picks up his son or his daughter, and he's floating all those particles back at them. It's your car is now contaminated. So we really want to break that chain, and the same is true of, you know, what we send to the shop. That's why we're bagging stuff, because the person in the shop is getting all that stuff when they open the bag. That's why we want to wet it. That's why we want to stop them from being exposed, because we want to reduce the dose. They become that point, right? So you'll see the industrial hygiene and the rehab. That's all part of managing the consequences of fire. And so we have safety documents that are associated with this. But again, we're going to go through with you after this effort as you become developed. And I guess, you know, as a sort of concluding sort of thought to the process that we have going on here is when we leave here, we're not done. You're not experts, right? You're students. And as students, there's a lot more development that has to happen to bring you up to the level of those experts that we've brought in. We want your skills at the highest level so that when you're passing on the knowledge, it's consistent, right? So we're looking for consistency. We're looking for not, you know, oh, I think I'll teach this today, and, well, you know, I don't need that. No, we're building a program that you follow. And we want that consistent across all groups. And we want all of us to be together on the path forward. You know, as a team, deciding and making those decisions on best ways to do what we have to do. We will modify. We will undertake change, considered change, but not arbitrary, right? As you feed back and say, well, this works, or this doesn't work, right? And there's been some questions about nozzles. So we've had discussions about nozzles with administration, and the idea was to put at least one on an attack line on every pump, right? So that's the concept. So you have the option of gas cooling. So it's not, you know, it's not airy-fairy. I'm here trying these things, and I have no way to implement it. So that is one of the discussions that has taken place. As well, we've had discussions on what the next steps are. So in terms of the next steps, we know that tactical building is going to be brought out here. November 7th, I think, is the install date. So our thought process and what we've advocated for is the individual instructors on a group get stuck on a pump and come out here up until we can with the weather conditions, and, you know, it starts to become quite inclement. We also have line troop that we can work with. So we're going to get back together again. We're going to look at how we have a consistency across that, and you just got to give me some time to, you know, we've been busy for these couple of weeks, and when we get back, we're going to be back at it in terms of getting you guys to practice and keep those skills at a place that you're comfortable with, and that you're comfortable with the material, right? And so that's what we want. That's the objective here. And, you know, one of the concepts, as I said, we come back as B group comes back, and one of the training officers comes back. The next day, C group's here, and the other training officers here. So we start seeing that sort of thing and gets integrated right into the training division, right? So that whole thing becomes locked in. And Chief Narroway joined us here today, and, you know, his work on the CFAI is about accreditation. And so, again, we want this program accredited such that there's a standard of delivery, and that's always been one of our desired outcomes. And we have some issues about getting it into the provincial and territorials. We'll be talking to Sheldon about that, is to you know, make sure this becomes standard within the Canadian environment, the Canadian Fire Service. We have a lot of support that joined and put together this program and agreed to getting the grant. So now getting it implemented with them has been, there are challenges because they've changed the players. Almost, in some cases, 3 different fire marshals, that kind of stuff. 3 different persons responsible for training within the province. So those kinds of challenges have really going to affect the way that we get things done. So that's another part of this project that really doesn't, if you will, impact you directly, but it will impact you directly. You know, so that's this kind of stuff we're doing. So there's a big logistics train to this. You know, I can't thank enough the instructors who've come from away. You guys have been phenomenal. I've heard nothing but great kudos to each and every one of you. It's been a pleasure and an honor to work with you.